And we're live. It is Thursday, April 17th, the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. on the dot. And I actually spent the last 15 seconds watching my little clock so that I could hit go live right as the 59 changed into a 00. So I'm on time today at a level of precision that astonishes even me. Folks, it is a bright, shiny day. The sun is shining. The birds are chirping. I actually thought this morning that I might have heard an owl early in the morning, but we're not sure. It's going to be a great frickin' day, and you are watching Dog Shirt TV, a goddamn revolution in morning television. And one of the more revolutionary features, and I do want to say that there are many of them, is that sometimes on the show, we workshop ideas for our friends. And that is what we're going to do today. We're going to be talking to the estimable Mike Pesca whenever he shows up about his what makes a great newsletter, because Mike Pesca has a new newsletter, and we're gonna talk about some ideas about newsletters. We're gonna hear from the Greek chorus about what you guys want in additional newsletters, because none of you have enough of them showing up in your mailboxes every day. And we're gonna help you fix that. We're gonna get refine concepts of newsletters. But before we do, because we can't start that yet because Mike Pesca isn't here yet, and really at the rate that I've gone recently in terms of being stood up by guests, for all I know, he will not show up. Yesterday, we workshopped how to be a slumlord, and I've gotten calls from slumlords all over the country, and in fact, all over Canada, thanking me and saying their slumlording business has, it just really helped them refine things, because they were kind of slumming it. See what I did there? That was clever. They were kind of slumming it along in the slumlording trade. But then yesterday they saw Ev on the show. They saw that pink carpet and they said, I can do better. And I know that that I've really reached, this has inspired me to do better in life. And so I'm going to get more and bigger rats. I'm going to, I was thinking of giving in to the tenants and fixing that wood rot. I'm going to hold out. I'm going to charge more for the standing room only area of the bathroom that I let out to an entire family and kind of crowd them in. So, we are here to help people be their best selves. And, I just want you to understand that we're here for you. And this show is really to help you become better at whatever you want to be. Yesterday, after we recorded that show, I got a text from EJ Wittes, who sometimes writes up the descriptions of the shows, or usually for the newsletter. And EJ said to me, I don't know how to write this one up. Should I play it straight? Because it is actually almost total nonsense the whole way through. And that is what we're going for here. We want you to, when we commit to the bit that the show is going to be about how to be a better slumlord and Ev going into the business, we're going to stick with that the whole way through. And similarly, when Mike Pesca shows up, we're going to have a serious conversation about newsletters. Look, we are not allowed to have fun anymore. But we are allowed to have inanities, and we're running with that because, as I always say, if you are not making fun of the situation, you are part of the situation. And I was impressed yesterday, and I have a witness to this encounter, by the way, who is a very senior executive at a major tech company. So if anybody ever challenges me on the veracity of the story that I'm about to tell, I just want you to know I have a witness. I was at the Tate Bakery on Connecticut Avenue, right where it hits 18th Street, and an N comes together in that little triangle. And I am walking out of the Tate, and a very well put together young woman says to me, "Excuse me, are you Benjamin Whitties?" And I, this happens to me every now and then, although much less than it used to, because it used to happen a lot because I was on television all the time. Now it happens very rarely, and they're almost always, lawfare or people who know my voice from the podcast, and or sometimes people who follow projection special military operations. And I said, yes. And she said to me, "Oh my God, I love your makeup videos." And I have to say, this one has never happened to me before. Um, uh, and so if you are that person, uh, first of all, you have no idea how happy that made me. I was I live to please, and being there for everybody in their hearts, or at least me, wants to be a 21-year-old female influencer. And this was my moment to be one. And so, we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have our moments where the wackiest and craziest things we do in life walk up to us on the street and say, OMG. Mike Pesca, you are a great American, and I loved that entry with the closing of the blinds, and so it becomes like a Mike Pesca turns the room of his house into a studio. Great to see you, man.
Good to see you. I never know when we're rolling, and I should just always assume always. Okay,
well,
great.
we're rolling at 8:00.
No, this I know, but there's the you're in the queue, you're on the show. No, I'm here. You could get me wearing my sweatpants under my nice button-down shirt. It's all good.
It's great. I mean, there is no bar in between reality and the show.
That's
here.
Right.
That's what we do.
Right. It's not a gradual step forward in morning television.
It's right.
Not, it's not a even punctuated equilibrium of
it's
evolution.
It's not even a revolution. It's a fucking revolution.
Yeah,
like
right.
the little New Zealand girl who said, "Look outside, mommy, it's a fucking goat." And the woman says, No, it's just a goat. And the little toddler says, "No, mommy, it's a fucking goat." And that's, it's not just a revolution here. It's a fucking revolution.
Yes.
All right, Mike Pesca, I have already told the audience we are talking newsletters today, and specifically we're workshopping yours.
All right.
So
I have a newsletter out. It's called the Gist List. It's going to be
Yeah, so
every day.
first of all, we're going to share it on the
Oh,
screen.
wow, that's nice.
And uh, you see, this is where things get complicated because we got to find it. And hang on,
This will be helpful, you know. My Substack.mikepesca.com. That's good to give the address out.
Yeah. It's actually open on my screen. I just have so many. Well, this is not good because Substack.
Mike Pesca. You know, to be accurate, it's Mike Pesca .substack.com.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes. If you want to be accurate, if you want to actually get there. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So tell us about, while I'm pulling this up, tell us about why you have a newsletter and why you looked at the newsletter market and thought to yourself, what it's missing is newsletters.
That's right, because that's probably not true. I decided to put together a bunch of different news, and I said, no one's thought of this. And it turns out everyone's thought of this, and everyone has one.
So what is distinctive about your newsletter, and why should people say what's missing from my life is an additional newsletter because I don't get enough email?
I know. That's there. You're definitely raising some issues that I had to contemplate and just plow through, either ignore or blow up in my mind or turn into non-issues but issue-tunities. So while there are probably too many newsletters out there, when I get a good one, I love it. Numlock. Do you know this one?
No.
Walt Hickey. Numlock is so good. And Walt's been doing...
Because I have a problem as a newsletter consumer that I'm going to share with you in a moment. But go on.
Numlock's so good because it's very distinctively Walt. And some of the Axios newsletters are good, or Bloomberg, because they own the corner of their area of expertise. So I said to myself, the newsletters that I really enjoy either have excellent writing from the person or are a collection of things that I need to know or things that I really want to know because they're delightful to know. And then I said to myself, I don't know, am I a need to know guy? Here's what I am. I will read a story and I will find the detail in paragraph 7 that I can't let go of, and that when I tell people, either on the show or in real life, we all contemplate. So there's no algorithm that you could get to that, but that's one of the things I'll do in the newsletter. I'll give you a couple examples of that from yesterday. And the other one is the weird story that might not be universally recognized as weird. So my friend Robert Smith, probably NPR's, greatest, funnest journalist, and sometimes I would mock him as the Quirkmaster General. And he knew what I meant, because there's a kind of story that you could do and fill and imbue with so much delight. But there was also the kind of story that kind of came pre-delighted, like you were, the example I give with the people I talk newsletters with is the 10,000 chicks on the highway, right? The truck turns over and there's a lot of baby chicks running around the highway. While that's a fun story, it doesn't really take much to elevate that to fun. So what I could do, and what my newsletter is trying to do, is either rising details, elevating details that are telling or that you need to know. That's one. Two is stuff that's a little bit underreported that I come across in I don't know if you want to call it alternate, but I scour like far left sources, not that far right sources, but some right leaning sources.
Just for those who don't know, Mike is voracious in his media consumption in a way that very few other people are.
Yeah. And I kind of beat myself up if there was a big story that one side of the ideological spectrum really knew about and it was being ignored by everyone else, and then it gets validated. And I say to myself, why didn't I know about it? Because some sort of gatekeeper somewhere kept it from us. So I try to bust through that gate a little bit. I think in newsletter 1, so far there's one example of this. I don't have a good one, but in newsletter 2, I'm going to have a good example of kind of an undercovered story that's appealing to only one side of the ideological spectrum. So, a telling detail, a big story that's getting a little ignored, slant on a story or my take on a story, and it's very terse, but a little bit of my take on a story that I think could help the discourse, and the fourth is something weird and funny. So we could even debate if a couple items that I'm considering should be in the newsletter, but let me maybe go back to newsletter 1 and talk about 2 of the stories that I was pretty proud of. So one was, it's a very minor story from 2 days ago where Andrew Cuomo is running for New York mayor, put out his housing proposal, which you'd think would be good. He ran HUD, He was king housing. There was no bigger housing guy than Andrew Cuomo. But he puts out his proposal this time around, and it's full of weird jargon and some links, and it's pretty clear if you've ever worked with ChatGPT, that's what went on. He just had ChatGPT do some or all of his housing proposal. Kind of sloppy, right? So his rivals deride him, and then his spokesman said, no, this shows that he's human, because that's the problem with Andrew Cuomo. No one knows about his foibles. But day 2 of the story is actually, and this is not day 2, it's like hour 7, but it didn't get into all the additions. It wasn't really about ChatGPT. Here's what happened. Andrew Cuomo has a key advisor, and he has one arm. And this guy gives an interview for the New York Times, this one-armed man, and he says, what I do is I dictate things a lot, and that's how it got into the sloppy-seeming housing proposal. It was because if you're making fun of the housing proposal and its links to ChatGPT...
It wasn't me, it was the one-armed man.
Yes, you're actually... Much like The Fugitive, he blamed the one-armed man. So I thought that was fantastic.
That was fantastic. I loved that one. Okay, I have a first of all, I have a few suggestions for you for your. So newsletters, in my experience, and I have this handicap, which is that
Andrew Cuomo's housing advisor.
I don't read them.
Yeah.
And there's a really simple reason that I don't read them, which has nothing to do with my objection to newsletters. It has to do with the fact that I don't read my email. And so it's sort of like the premise, it's like asking somebody who's only used stone tablets about their, favorite newspapers. It was like, sorry, I don't use paper. It's just a platform incompatibility problem. And I decided, a few years ago, I was feeling very guilty about not reading my emails. And then I decided I have no obligation to read my emails. There's no divine commandment that binds me as a human being that you shall read your emails, nor did I ever sign up for any contract that obligated me to read my emails.
Well, a little bit, like socially, no.
So what I tell people is, if you really want to reach me, I'm going to get to the emails eventually. It's not that I never read them.
Right.
It's that I don't promise to read them on this side of 3 months. And eventually I'm going to get to them. But, I'm a busy guy and I have all kinds of obligations to people I know. And the people I know well will text me or will call me or will just show up in my office. And so I'm not promising to deal with emails, particularly not from people I don't know. Now, this means that if you're a newsletter writer whom I don't know at all, and you send me a newsletter, mind you, I will have signed up for it. If I didn't sign up for it and you put me on your email list involuntarily, I block you. But if I signed up for it, it kind of means it's likely to be out of date by the time I see it. And so I am not an ideal consumer of newsletters. Even though I produce one, and I'm a hypocrite, but, fuck it. That's the way life works.
But the good thing about Substack is if email isn't your venue of choice for engagement, you could opt in and just go to Substack. You might be browsing Substack for other items and then come across the newsletter part of the world.
So I use Substack like people used, Blogger
Hmm.
or GeoCities, right? Like it's a place where a bunch of interesting people have websites that I browse. And like, ooh, it looks like, so and so just tweeted that they have a new post up at Substack. And I treat it like a website. Um, and now Substack has this very nice app that says, oh, Mike Pesca is live with so and so, and maybe I'm interested in that, so I'll click watch. But like, I treat it like a combination of like 2006 era Blogger and, kind of YouTube.
Yeah.
Um, so, all that said, it seems to me that for the Mike Pesca audience creation project, it seems to me you have three naturally cool core audiences. One is people who listen to the gist.
Yes.
You know that audience intimately. The second, sports bros. I mean, let's be honest. Like, you know a shitload about sports.
This is true.
And sports bros are going to be the most likely people in the world to subscribe to a newsletter. So you got to lean into the sports stuff, I think.
Okay. That's a good note. We should have a corner, a sports story of the day, every day.
I think you got to have, like, there's got to be, you got to have some people who were like that talk show host you were on with about the shooting in New York, who was, a right-wing talk show host and was just shocked to find out that you hadn't voted for, but you had a good conversation with him.
Yeah, the guy from St. Louis, right?
But he comes to you from a different, and he was
Mike,
just
you voted for Kamala Harris?
Yeah, like totally
the other guy's
shocked
Donald
by
Trump,
that.
right?
But you've got an audience among people who are, who are, uh, uh, come to it from a different point of view because they're interested in things that you're interested in. And, there's a music side of that. There's like, a whole lot of rock music, pop music history. You have a lot of sports. This is not my stuff, but like these people will subscribe to things. And I think you got to lean into that.
Good idea. Because if you have a corner, if it's half sports,
then you're going to piss me off and piss off the. But of course, I'm not going to read it in a timely fashion anyway. See earlier comment. The third audience, which is your core audience that you don't already have from the gist, is contrarians everywhere, because you're like the core Mike Pesca thing is. The essence of Mike Pescaism is I saw this thing that you all saw. I had the same instinct that you all had. And then I looked into it and, actually.
Like, we got to do something about that word, right? We got to rehabilitate actually.
Actually. Yeah.
We got to make it fun. Surprisingly.
Yeah. And, all right, yeah, the vexillologists and the is that bullshit people are gonna, you have that demographic already. But it seems to me that the biggest growth area for you is people who want to have the actually conversation. Yeah. And so I would say those latter two are your like, those are. There's a lot of actually people, and there's a whole lot of sports people.
Cool. What about actually sports people?
Actually sports people. See, I don't know enough about sports to have a sense of how you do that.
Actually, Steph Curry is a terrible three-point shooter. He's not, but it would be great if he were. That would be a great Mike Pesca story.
So, here's a sports story I want to read.
Okay.
Why are all the greatest hockey players politically so appalling?
I mean, they're from prairie provinces in Canada.
We just had the great one.
Yeah.
hanging out with Donald Trump
Yeah.
while his record is being broken by a Putinist.
Well, I mean, he grew up in Soviet Russia. What can you do? It's
I
where
don't
these
know.
guys come from.
Yeah, but can't they be like? I don't know. There are some good Canadians. What like
There are good
Wayne Gretzky
Canadians.
seems to be the only pro-Trump Canadian.
No, I mean PK Subak is a good guy. There are very moderate guys. I think we've over-indexed for the two greatest goal scorers of all time. Although I can't tell you what Bobby Hull's politics were or Gordie Howe's. Gordie Howe, do you know what the Gordie Howe hat trick is?
No.
Okay, well, a hat trick is 3 goals, and the Gordie Howe hat trick is 3 goals in a fight. So he was, he's a scrapper.
Right, but you can be a
It's an
scrapper
interesting
and
question.
be, look, are you a Hulk Hogan scrapper or are
Right.
you a John Fetterman scrapper, right?
Yeah, this is, Fetterman. Wow, imagine him as a hockey player. He would he would just be a bruiser. He'd come in as an enforcer. All right, these are great pieces of advice. I do want to tell you about a story we did yesterday about, I think this gets into both the little slice of the big story and the contrarian part. So Harvard is being stripped of funding. A lot of stuff to talk about there. Here's what I chose to talk about. One of the researchers who does important work in immunology, Sarah Fortune is her name. She talked about all this great study, all these studies she does, all these things that she does and that the school does that will probably save many lives. And there's also a small study that they're funding and undergoing that includes macaque monkeys, and she is currently fretting about having to kill all the monkeys in the study if the funding runs out. And
I like that item, Mike, but I want to say you missed an opportunity, which was the the sort of hostage taking. I'll kill all the fucking monkeys if you, you cut my money.
I couldn't help but talking about this on the gist, and my take was, okay, I understand the considerations. You might run out of food for the monkeys. Here's an alternative suggestion. Don't kill the monkeys. Though tempting to kill the monkeys, because once you have monkeys, they're carrying upkeep.
Scene from Blazing Saddles that comes to mind,
or the National Lampoon, the cover with the dog on the cover and the gun to his head. Buy this magazine, or I'll kill this dog. There is definitely a hostage taking, and as I was reading, I was like, is it something about the monkeys are being subject to a disease, and without the vaccine, the disease will ravage them? It seems not. It seems just inconvenient or somewhat expensive to have the monkeys. And also, another aspect of this, the monkeys are off-site. The actual monkeys that they're supposedly going to kill are in Pittsburgh. So, this is like the United States outsources its gulags to El Salvador, and Harvard outsources its black sites to Pittsburgh, and then the order comes in, the monkeys are going down. Don't kill the monkeys. Please.
All right.
Smartest people in America.
Yeah. So let's talk about the hostage taking with respect to monkeys, humans, institutions, because I think while we're on this El Salvador comparison, there's a lot of really dark humor to be happening here. And so my question is, is it okay to joke about Salvadoran gulags? For example, the Onion had a great headline the other day, which was, Judge gives Trump 3 days to release her from Salvadoran prison, which I thought was excellent. Yeah. But I'm also like, okay, guys, we're actually talking about, Kilmar Garcia, Abrego Garcia is a real person, So there's I love the darkest of dark humor stuff about the news, but I'm super aware that it may really offend people.
Yeah, that's true. I think that Onion headline, where was the, who's the object of the joke? It's really important. So if you're mocking a poor guy who's in prison, who shouldn't be, or if you're doing anything to elevate the dictator, uh, Nayib Bukele, you're probably not on the right side of humor or history. I think that in the last couple years, the whole "is it okay to joke about?" So I'll put my finger on this. What I just articulated, well, it depends who the joke's on. That used to be the overriding interest, and then there was a time where somehow the joke makers, or enough of them who could be pressured, got convinced that even if the joke is in the right place and the target of the joke, even if you have to say, no, 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 don't you understand what we're doing? That got thrown out the window. And I don't know if it was you couldn't, but there were much more social stakes to even making a joke where the object of the joke and you were pointing a finger at the wrongdoer correctly. It didn't matter if there was a joke on the matter. I think we've swung back a little bit. So the Onion headline, you can and did, and they're, in good standing, in polite company, and won't be defunded.
So you think the Onion is the Onion headline is kosher?
Totally, because the object of the joke. It's also, yes, it's a great joke because you have to do a little mental arithmetic there. Wait, Judge, oh, I see what's going on. And who's the joke on? It's this autocratic lawlessness of the administration.
Yeah, so I want to say I am very pro this Onion joke, and I think what makes it awesome is that it is so close to a plausible headline. So here's the headline. And all you have to do is change her to Abrego Garcia or detainee, and you have reality. And then, of course, if you read the lead, decrying the deportation as wholly lawless, U.S. District Judge Paul Assini's real judge ruled Monday that the Trump administration had 3 days, totally accurate, to return her to the United States or face contempt of court charges. So I just think the proximity to our real situation is a thing of cosmic beauty.
I want to put my finger on a problem that the Onion might have, and it's not content related, it's monetizing it. Can you go back to that page?
Yeah.
Okay. So they're not doing so well, and they wanted to buy Alex Jones' operation, but they couldn't quite get it all together. So scroll down, and there's that Russell Brand headline, and Katy Perry. She already chosen to be jettisoned. That's not a great headline. But anyway, go up, scroll up, right? You got Katy, you got Russell Brand, you got the judge. Scroll up. That Vanguard ad. Doesn't it strike you as, okay, what's the joke there? That's not funny. It just doesn't seem like a real ad. It's not a great space for advertising. It makes it seem like, oh, this is a parody of what I'm trying to sell.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Of course, the Vanguard ad is Google fed. At least I think it is.
Yeah, because you could turn it out with ad choices.
So it's a reflection not of what the Onion is selling, but probably an algorithmic response to my search history. That said, you'd think that no one would want to advertise in that spot for exactly the reason that you...
The more prominent, the worse.
Yeah.
And then if the ad happened to have the green color scheme, ooh boy.
Yeah, so we can raise this with... So here's the question. If you were running the Onion and you were trying to keep them financially afloat, how do you do advertising without contextually making fun of your advertisers?
Well, what you'd have to do is go out there, and it's hard because the Onion isn't so big that you could convince the creatives on an ad side to dedicate themselves to this project, but they'd have to do an ad that knows it's in the Onion, and they'd have to do kind of funny, quirky ads that are the opposite of what a normal ad should be. So I can't come up with something.
I mean, I have to say, while we're talking about making fun of your advertisers, I have been interested in how the Pod Save America guys make fun of their advertisers.
Do they still? Haven't they pulled that back big time?
They still do it.
Uh-huh.
You
Love
know,
it does. I resented them in the beginning because I'm like, guys, you either have ads and you're a little thankful or respectful, or I just thought that they were trying to have their cake and eat it too. Of, well, we have ads, but look how cool we are. We're going to make fun of the ad copy, and that flew for a while.
So I don't understand why the advertisers tolerate it. I guess it's because they're so big and it's part of their shtick. But I don't like, if I were an advertiser, you know, they make fun of the advertiser's ad copy, which they, you know, identify as ad copy. So they sort of violate the third wall. And I'm like, look, if you can get away with it, I'm for it, because, you know, advertising is like, why should you play along with it? Except that, you know, you did sign up to play along with it. And you know, I'm just kind of intrigued that the advertisers let them do that, and, you know, let them say things like, okay, you read the copy and then say, oh, come on, so and so.
Huh. Yeah, they've always done that. I sensed they were doing it less, but maybe I was convincing myself of this because people within the industry were telling me that after they signed their huge deal with Sirius, they had obligations to deliver a certain amount of eyeballs, earballs, ad dollars, and so they had to up the load, and so they have to do many more ads than they do in the beginning. That's all true. I guess it's a good problem to have, to be such in demand. But I also thought part of it was the advertisers, when they first started, they were such a phenomenon, and they're still, especially now, especially in the last few months and pre-election, doing a lot better. But it's not like it was in the heady days of just starting Crooked Media. But nothing is. Yeah.
So tell me about your own sense of the industry right now, because you have this unique experience in the podcasting world of, first of all, you've run the same show for, it's like 15 years now,
11,
right?
Yeah. 11, 12, yeah.
And there aren't that many continuous shows, and I think there are none that are daily. And then you've also had this very unusual experience of doing it both through a fairly big company, and then doing it independently. And you've done it through the growth of this market in which, you know, you were an early entrant into, and then now you're one of a huge crowd. So what's the, like, tell us about the sort of trajectory of trying to make a living doing podcasting.
Well, in the beginning, it was telling people what a podcast is, and that was not always an easy task. And the listeners that you get in the beginning, those stay your listeners unless you have an enormous pop at some point far down the line. So I think Pod Save America listeners mostly started with Pod Save America, and I think if you're of maybe a more liberal persuasion and younger, you might be going to Midas Touch, you might be going to David Pakman, you might be going to Destiny, probably online, to get your left of center political leanings. Although Ezra Klein is maybe an exception to this. And Ezra had a show with Vox, and now he's with the New York Times, and he's bigger than ever. So in the beginning, it was hard to just tell anyone what a podcast is. And there are curves that intersect. It was easy to get a big share of the market and just, I don't know if it was easy. I mean, you'd have to do it every day and be of some quality, but there was less competition. So of the few people who knew what a podcast was, many people would be able to find your show. But there wasn't much advertising dollars out there. Now, there's more and more advertising dollars out there, though not a tremendous amount of advertising dollars, but there's also so many more shows. You'll often see as a denominator some incredibly inflated number because anyone could try a podcast. So if you take away all the abandoned podcasts or all the amateur projects and you think about real podcasts, there are still, 2x, 10x, something like that, number of shows competing for twice as, I would say there's probably 10 times as many viable shows competing for 2 or 3 times as many ad dollars and listeners. So that's your lay of the land. The big problem is that discoverability is all but impossible. So there are really only 3 ways for anyone to find out about your podcast. One is be part of a podcast network where they can elevate the show, but this is what they all try to do, and that's no guarantee. So even Crooked Media, they have many shows in their fiefdom. They don't all succeed. Many don't. The quality of the show, strict scrutiny, the legal show is a quality show. So that did well. But there are other shows that they tried to do around other themes, and the audience didn't want to listen. So it's far from a guarantee. And the other big way to have a big show is to be a celebrity. And that works. And I would like to tell you that there are a lot of kind of bad or half-assed celebrity podcasts that didn't go. But there are a lot of half-assed celebrity podcasts that did. Right now, Amy Poehler has a podcast that's very good, and I'm glad it's doing well. But I also have to say, and I'll make history here by saying Smartless, though affable and they have a great guest list, and those guys are funny, man, it's a 3/4 ass show. And I guess they would say that is what their shtick is. We're Smartless. We don't prep for the guests, but it seems like a show of non-professional interviewers who are always stepping on each other, not finishing a thought, who don't prep for the guests. So, yeah. Anyway, I do my thing. They do theirs. I think they probably do their thing at least as good, if not tons better than I do my thing. But I'm a little confused at the staying power of that show. Those guys are incredibly likable. We all want to be friends with them in real life. But do a little, I guess you can't do prep for the guest, but just I don't know, maybe when you announce the guest, someone could put a sheet of paper in front of you so you're talking about anything other than the time he did a walk-on on Arrested Development, which is every damn show.
Yeah, I want to, I, as somebody who is not that interested in celebrities, I have to say, I find the celebrity podcast thing completely baffling. Just the number of them and the number of people who have this great idea, which I only hear about because they advertise on other podcasts, which is some person that I've never heard of who's actually a celebrity, who's going to be interviewing other celebrities. And what's the subject of the show? The fact that they're all celebrities, right?
That's pretty much it. They don't go far beyond that. Yeah.
And, and then, I keep trying to figure out what is the show about. And the answer is always that, well, I'm famous and I have famous people on the show. And so it's this sort of circular firing squad of fame. But if you don't share the premise of being very interested in fame, it's kind of baffling. And it's one thing if the host is extraordinarily talented.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking here of Alex Cooper, who, for those of you who have never heard of her, runs a show called Call Her Daddy, which I discovered a number of years ago because when we released The Report, which, was our first major narrative podcast, it was way, way up there on the Apple charts, and every episode was just one chart space behind this show called Call Her Daddy. And I was like, wow, what is this show that's beating us every week? And I listened to it, and was then these 2 women, now it's 1, talking about their sex lives and sleeping with athletes and stuff.
Back then it was Call Your Daddy, right?
Call Her Daddy.
Okay. What's it now?
No, it never changed names.
I thought it did. Okay.
The 2 hosts split up, and it was a drama and all that.
Yeah.
And the thing that, everybody talked about how disgusting the show is, and the show is genuinely disgusting. But the thing that nobody talked about it is what an extraordinary talent she is. She's an incredible storyteller. She's quite mesmerizing to listen to. And I felt vindicated in my admiration for her. I just think she's up there with Mike Pesca and Virginia Heffernan as like a great talker. It's just that she's talking about blowjobs. And
Which for a lot of people is an inducement.
look, I mean, like the subject matter is not my thing. I like having, Gen Z or young millennials talk about their sex lives. But just as as a professional who does this thing every day where we get up and talk, she's out of my league. She's extraordinary. And I noticed that when Kamala Harris decided to, finally go on a podcast, right, and do the podcast thing, she went on Call Her Daddy, right? And so they were noticing the same thing years later but it does have this quality of not being about anything. And, as somebody whose idea of a podcast was, okay, every day, Lawfare is going to take the news of the day, right? Today it's Mexican drug cartels and U.S. guns, and we're going to talk about something with somebody who knows something about it. There is something a little bit weird to me about the percentage of podcasts that are sort of self-consciously not about anything.
Yeah. Well, I think this comes from Twitch and streaming, where the average length of a show is like 4.5 hours, and it's hanging out with Destiny or whoever your guy is or girl and just shooting the shit for 4 hours. And then sometimes those people become so popular or the audience gets trained in the hang podcast that you take it over to podcast and these things run really, really long, And that has always been my biggest critique of Joe Rogan. Now it's the Nazi toe touch portions of the show, but it's just too long. It's like the more popular Rogan is, the less time there is to listen to podcasts in the world. If you have a feed of Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman, that's it. That's it, unless you're doing meth. And then if you add a Twitch streamer, there's 13 hours of your day. You know who's good at a celebrity podcast who brings something to it is Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Her podcast is very good and she gets somewhere. And there are a couple others. I think Dax Shepard, he's been doing it for a long time, and I know his moves, but he has some skill. And if he wanted to not be a quote-unquote celebrity podcast, I mean, I think that the people aren't necessarily listening to him because of the celebrity of Dax Shepard, but because of the skill he brings to the table. But discoverability is a huge problem, and that's why I'm leaning more into Substack. That's one of the real big reasons I'm doing the newsletter. If I have a daily offering on Substack, and then I augment it with things I write on Substack. And then I'm going to start, they have these good tools where you do what we're doing here as a live hangout on Substack. And then they even have a part of Substack called Notes, which is trying to be social media, and it's good. But, we have a lot of social media to choose from. I know there's a way I'm seeing that they take podcasting. And notice I didn't even list podcasting is what I'm doing on Substack, but essentially all of it is podcasting related. I think that there's a chance to break through.
So I think that you and I should do a regular Substack hangout.
Mm-hmm.
Not as part of Dogshirt TV, because Dogshirt TV I insist on doing on Riverside because number one, it's a Riverside is, as it's a better platform technically.
Oh yeah.
Number two, I really think the audience should be able to break in any time, and number three, I don't want to be limited to only two people at a time. I have multiple co-hosts who are always invited every time, and so I want the additional capability. But I do think that, creating the informal network through recommendations and, doing hangouts in which Substack people are sharing subscribers with each other is really valuable, and I think we should, do I don't know if we should schedule it, but particularly as you're getting started, how many subscribers do you have on that thing?
I think it's around 5,000 now.
Yeah. So, and what's the difference between the Substack and Pesca Profundities, which used to be the Substack?
I just changed the name and made that be my long form writing. Those are my essays. I just wanted to distinguish between the gist list, which is the newsletter, and everything else that's writing. Yeah, I do think we should do this. I often have questions for you. It's weird. I have relationships with people who are like, oh, yeah, we're friends. We hang out. When? On my podcast or his podcast. Isn't that odd?
Yeah, but we've actually hung out in real life.
Yeah. Only because we don't want to be podcast-only friends. I did want to ask you.
We've met in person, what, 4 times?
I think so, but you came out to Brooklyn, and you've come out to Brooklyn a couple times.
I've come out to Brooklyn twice. We had dinner at your pizza place with Kate. And you and I had dinner, and then back when Slate used to host just live stuff, I did an event with you in Washington at one point. There may be a couple other
Quinta was there, right. I wanted to ask you about Trump and Bukele and El Salvador. Look, I can't shake the feeling that Donald Trump, will eventually realize this is less popular than more popular. And even though he has he hates admitting mistakes and doesn't admit mistakes, but will change policies and say this is what I wanted to do all along, or, rhetorically say that I won, fine. I just think that though it can be explained as he's an asshole, he won't admit mistakes, he wants to be an autocrat, all that stuff, I think that this is really going to start showing up in the polls, and I think he's going to somehow relent. I think the guy will be, I don't know, I'll ask you this way. Do you think in a year he'll still be in the prison?
Well, so let's distinguish. First of all, I think there's 2 issues here, right? One is Abrego Garcia himself, and the other is the other 270 people who were sent on the same set of flights, who are some number of whom, and I don't think we know exactly how many of them were deported under the Alien Enemies Act. And so you now have 2 district judges, Paul Asines and Jim Boasberg, who are, independent of one another, but both have a Supreme Court opinion that says, effectively what the administration did was illegal. And, both of them are now thinking in the language of contempt to deal with, and the only way you would get rid of the contempt in either case is to bring people back. And so the real question, and so let's take 2 scenarios. One is that they hold somebody in contempt, which I think is all but certain, and the Supreme Court modifies or overturns that. Then I think the administration wins. And the second scenario, which I think is more likely, honestly, is that the Supreme Court affirms in some form some contempt finding in one or both of these cases. And in that case, look, it's not a battle between the administration and the 2 liberal district judges appointed by Barack Obama who should be impeached and, who are trying to take over U.S. foreign policy. It's a battle with the Supreme Court. And I don't know that we know how Trump will respond to that. And I don't want to start with, a lot of people leap to the question, what if he violates a court order? Well, he's already violating court orders, right? Yeah. And so the question is, if you state the question properly, it's, do the courts have the tools to enforce their orders over time? And I don't want to assume that the answer to that question is no. I wrote a column yesterday that, acknowledges the difficulties of it, but I still want to act like, Soviet dissidents had this radical idea that they should take the laws of the Soviet Union as written seriously as law and, demand that they be allowed to do the things that Soviet law allowed them to do. I don't want to assume less about US federal judges than Soviet dissidents assumed about their own abilities under the Soviet system. So my view is that we shouldn't catastrophize our situation and therefore declare it hopeless, though it may be a catastrophe and it may be hopeless.
Yeah.
I don't want to deny that possibility, but show me a unanimous Supreme Court decision or an all but unanimous Supreme Court decision that Trump is not honoring, and that the court is not able or willing to enforce its will over time. And then we'll talk. But until we get to that point, I'm going to pretend we still have a legal system.
Yeah, that's a great answer. That gives me a lot of information. And that's the answer I absolutely want from someone in your position. My question, or my supposition, was more along the lines of, well, actually, what you're saying informs much of what I'm asking. But I think that the actual public sentiment on this will have a great deal of impact on how far Trump goes. Now, you've laid out a premise where there are some form of guardrails, or here's a disincentive for going so far as to defy a very clear court order. I think that there's evidence that when the public really, really sours, and meaning all of the public, or enough of the public except the 25% of his base that really felt the election was stolen and so forth, I think that Trump is smart enough to relent. And this is just one person. So you could argue, and I was wondering, is it going to be abandoned as a story? Is it going to be overtaken? Though we're driven by the anecdotal and the personal, it's just one person. And I think a lot of the debate will play out based on how effectively they smear, or they've released these documents that, seem official or maybe even are official, about how he had braces and, currency with like the faces of the presidents blacked out, which is supposedly a sign of a gang member. I think that a lot of it will depend on where the public stands, where sentiment is, not just liberal resistance sentiment, but normie sentiment is on this. Just like with the stock market, although the stock market is exogenous to sentiment itself. And so I was wondering where you thought that would go, because I think that'll have a big effect, and I think he changes tack based on that.
Yeah, so I don't purport to understand the politics of any of these things anymore. I would have thought that if you rounded up a person who by mistake and deported him to a gulag in El Salvador and then smeared him by way of explaining it, that you would lose 80% of your popularity right away. And then if you had the president of El Salvador in the Oval Office to chortle about it, that the other 20% would go away. But I also would have thought that, firing the FBI director to install Kash Patel, or firing the FBI director back in 2017 would have negative political implications. And so clearly my sense of the politics is worth nothing. And, I don't pretend to have any insight into the politics of things. I do think that he is responsive to politics. And, you see that with the tariffs, which insofar as he believes in anything, he believes in tariffs. And, the market sent him a very powerful signal that, this is a loser for you, and he backed off.
Right, right.
And so
and there are no markets for one guy kept in an El Salvador prison.
Right. And so that, the question is, what's the information feedback mechanism? And the courts are part of that. But I also think there are other factors. And so look, I don't know. And I'm not a political analyst. And I observe that your question is a good one. And I don't think we should assume that he is not responsive to any political feedback. Which is why I think it's good that people turn out and protest these things. I think it's good that Chris Van Hollen is going to El Salvador to try to, demand an audience with him and make sure he's alive. Like, all of those political stimuli are good. And we are out of time, Mike Pesca.
That was great. Let's do it again in many different fora.
Let's do it again early and often. You are a great American. And it is great to see you. Hey, for everybody who is not yet aware that we have this amazing organic fundraiser going on, I just want to share this with you. This is, we put this up the other day to try to support some of our, we have some aspirations to hire more journalists. We have, a team that's covering the litigation, and it has gone completely viral. So what I want everybody who sees this to do, first of all, if you have inclination to support it yourself, please do. But if you want to do something to keep the virality of it going, whatever social media you use, share this little, what are they called? Scannable things. And
QR code?
Yeah, the code. I have just shared in the chat where you can get it. It is live.givebutter.com/c/journalism. And, share on whatever social media products you use that this thing exists. And you can also just use givebutter.com/c/journalism, and you can help us keep the virality of this remarkable fundraiser that we were expecting to, I don't know, I would have been happy with 10% of what we've raised so far. It is definitely taken on a life of its own. And so please help it, like an ice bucket challenge it, do whatever you need to do to make sure that everybody you've ever met is aware of it. Folks, we're going to be back tomorrow. I have no idea who the host is going to be, co-host is going to be. I have no idea who the guest is going to be. I only know one thing. I'll be there with you. Cheers.